The ring was warm from his pocket, not cold as she expected, when he pressed it into her palm in the dark and said her sister's name. Hester Vane did not correct him. Not at first. Not in the 4 seconds it took her mind to catch up with her ears, and by the time it had caught up the moment, had already closed over her head like water. Rain had put out 3 of the garden lamps an hour before, and the 4th guttered somewhere behind the yew hedge, too far to matter. The Duke of Merrow stood a foot from her in the dark, breathing as though he had run the length of the terrace to reach her, and he was not a man who ran for anything. "Cassandra," he said again, quieter, and it was the quiet that undid her, because she had heard him speak exactly twice before in her life, and both times his voice had been flat as a closed ledger. It was not flat now. "I have turned this over 100 ways, and I find I do not care for any of the sensible ones. Will you have me?" No one in the garden that night knew what would come of a wet hedge, a blown-out lamp, and one sister standing where another should have stood. It would cost a county its winter's gossip, a man his good name, and a house its long-kept silence, and none of it had happened yet. It began, as such things nearly always do, with a mistake nobody meant to make. Hester Vane was 25 years old, the younger daughter of a dead apothecary, and she had gone out into the garden of Merrow Hall for the single practical purpose of finding feverfew, because her grandfather's cough had worsened that week, and the Hall's kitchen garden was known to keep a bed of it near the wall. She had not meant to be found. She had certainly not meant to be found wearing Cassandra's grey cloak, which she had borrowed against the rain, or to be mistaken in the near dark for the sister the whole county understood the Duke of Merrow intended to marry. She should have said his name was wrong the instant he said hers. She opened her mouth to do exactly that. Then a door banged somewhere above them, and Mrs. Colby's voice came calling thin across the lawn, "Cassandra. Cassandra, you will catch your death," and the Duke's hand closed briefly, only briefly, over Hester's fingers where the ring sat, and he was gone into the dark before she had managed a single word, correct or otherwise. She stood alone with a stranger's ring in her hand, and did not move for the length of 10 full breaths. Hester was not a woman given to standing still. She had learned composure the way she had learned everything else that mattered, at her father's elbow in a shop that smelled of dried lavender and hot wax, watching him weigh out grains of medicine to the exact scruple, while a farmer's wife wept over a sick child. And she had learned that flinching solved nothing a steady hand could not solve better. Edmund Vane had died 3 years before this night, of a lung complaint no physic of his own devising could touch, and he had left his younger daughter 2 things of value: a small leather book of recipes in his close slanted hand, and the habit of looking hard at anything before she trusted it. She looked hard at the ring now, a man's signet, heavy, warm still from his coat, the Merrow crest cut deep into worn gold. Not a lady's ring, not a courting trinket bought that afternoon from a jeweller in the county town. He had given Cassandra, he believed, the ring from his own hand, because he had come out into a rained-on garden with no other ring to give, and had not thought to wait. She closed her fingers over it and went to find her sister. She found Cassandra in the blue sitting-room with her back against the door as though something might come through it, white to the lips, and the first thing Cassandra said, before Hester had gotten 2 words out, was, "Did he, Hester, tell me he did not?" "He asked you to marry him," Hester said. "He believes he asked you. He asked me, in the dark, in your cloak, and I did not tell him otherwise before your aunt called you in." Cassandra's hand went to her mouth. She was the elder by 2 years, and the handsomer by every measure the county troubled to keep. Golden where Hester was plain, soft-spoken where Hester was direct, and she had spent the whole autumn being walked, gently and relentlessly, toward the Duke of Merrow by their aunt's careful arrangements, though her heart, as Hester alone in the household knew, had been given already and elsewhere. To a man with no title and no fortune and a schoolroom full of chalk dust. "I cannot marry him," Cassandra whispered. "Hester, I cannot." "I know," Hester said. "Then you must tell him. Tomorrow you must go and tell him it was a mistake, that it was me in the dark and not, that he was wrong." Hester turned the ring over once in her palm, feeling the crest bite cold into her thumb, and understood. With the particular clarity that came to her only in the worst moments, that this was true, and simple, and that she would do it at first light, and that nothing about the doing of it would be simple at all. She did not sleep. She sat by her window with her father's little book open on her knee, though she did not read it, and watched the black shape of Merrowhalls Park 2 miles off, where the last lamp still burned in one high window, and she turned the ring over and over until the crest had worn a small red mark into her palm, a mark that would still be there, faint, 3 mornings later, by which time the whole business had already gone further than any sensible plan of hers could reach, because by first light, before Hester had so much as broken her fast, a note had already gone from Merrow Hall to Larkspur Cottage in the Duke's own economical hand, addressed not to Cassandra but, with a precision that made Hester's stomach drop when she read the direction, to Miss Hester Vane. "I find upon reflection that I addressed you rightly last night, whatever the dark may have obscured for either of us. I would speak with you again, in daylight and alone at your earliest convenience." Merrow, he had known. Somehow, in the space between the garden and his own front door, he had known. The Duke of Merrow received her the following morning in a study, with the curtains half drawn, standing rather than sitting, which she would come to learn, was his habit when a conversation mattered to him. He was a tall man, spare through the shoulders in the way of someone who had once carried more weight than his frame now held, with a stillness about him that the county called coldness, and that Hester, within 10 minutes, had already begun to suspect was something else entirely. "You are not my aunt's Cassandra," he said, before she had finished her curtsy. "No, your Grace. I am her sister. Hester, I know. I knew before you'd said 3 words in the garden, and I said the wrong name regardless, because it was already out of my mouth, and I did not think, in the moment, that it mattered which of you it was." She had come prepared to apologize, to explain, to offer him a clean and dignified retreat from an entanglement neither of them had chosen. She had not come prepared for him to say it did not matter. "It matters a great deal, your Grace," she said. "You proposed to a woman you believed to be my sister. I did not correct you, which was my failing, and I have come this morning to correct it now. There is no understanding between us. There was never meant to be. I am aware of what I believed at the time," he said. "I am telling you what I believe this morning, which is different, and which I arrived at somewhere on the walk back to the house, turning over 3 words you said to me in that garden that my aunt's Cassandra would never in her life have said." "What words?" "You said, when I asked whether you would have me, 'That depends a great deal on what you are asking for.' Cassandra would have said yes. Cassandra has been taught, kindly and thoroughly, to say yes to a duke. You asked me a question back, in the dark, with a stranger's ring already closed in your fist, as though you meant to audit the offer before you accepted it." He paused. "I have not been asked a real question by anyone in 2 years. I find I do not wish to retract the proposal, simply because it landed on the wrong sister. I wish instead to make it properly, to the right one, and to be told plainly whether she'll have me. The room was very quiet. Somewhere below them a clock struck the half-hour, and Hester, who had rehearsed a dignified refusal the entire walk over, found the sentence had nowhere to go. "I will not be married for a ring given in the dark to the wrong woman," she said finally. "I will not be pitied into a match, Your Grace, nor bought out of one. My family has debts, and I have no dowry worth the ink to record it, and I would ask you to consider whether what you felt last night was a man's relief at being spoken to plainly, and nothing more lasting than that." Something in his face did not soften exactly, but steadied, the way a scale settles once the true weight has finally been set upon it. "Then let us find out which it was," he said. "Not by marrying you tomorrow. My mother is unwell, has been unwell the better part of a year, and no physic the county has sent her has done more than keep her breathing. I am told your father was the finest apothecary in 3 counties, and that you kept his shop's books and his recipes both, before his passing. Come to Merrow Hall, tend her, earn your wages honestly, under my roof, where I may know you as something other than a name I said wrongly in the dark. If in a season neither of us has changed our mind, I will ask you again, properly, with a ring that was bought for the purpose. And if I refuse the position, then I will have lost a physician my mother badly needs, and you will have lost nothing at all, because I will not hold a mistake of my own making against a woman who did nothing but stand where the dark put her." He inclined his head. "I do not offer this out of pity, Miss Vane. I have watched this county's apothecaries fail my mother for 11 months. I am told you would not." Hester thought of her grandfather's cough, of the debts her cousin Silas managed with a smile too wide for comfort, of Cassandra's white face in the blue sitting-room, of wages that would mean feverfew and coal both this winter, instead of a choice between them. "I will take my wages, Your Grace," she said. "I will not take your pity, and I will not take your name until I am certain it is truly mine to take." "Agreed," he said, and something almost like the ghost of a smile crossed his mouth before he mastered it. "You may begin Thursday." Merrow Hall, when the carriage brought her up its long avenue 3 days later, was not the bright, laughing house the county gossips described from its better years. Half its windows were shuttered, though it was scarcely past noon, and the few servants who crossed the courtyard did so with the particular quiet of people used to a house that did not welcome noise. Somewhere above, behind one drawn curtain, a woman coughed, thin and persistent, and did not stop for the length of time it took Hester to climb the front steps with her father's book under her arm and her whole future, unweighed and unmeasured, walking in beside her. The servants at Merrow Hall had a full week of speculation stored up before Hester had unpacked her single trunk, and they spent it lavishly. She heard the shape of it in doorways and behind her back in the still-room, never quite loud enough to answer, and never quite quiet enough to miss, the apothecary's daughter, brought in under some tale about the dowager's health, when everyone from the scullery to the stables knew the real story had a ring in it, and a dark garden, and a mistake nobody in the house believed was entirely an accident. "She'll have snared him proper," said one of the laundry maids, not troubling to lower her voice, as Hester passed with an armful of linen for the dowager's sick-room. Sisters swapped in the dark, and now look, settled into the house like she's already got the keys. Hester did not answer. She had learned that particular silence from her father, who had spent 30 years listening to farmers' wives accuse him of every manner of quackery before they trusted him with their children, and who had taught her that the only answer worth giving to an idle tongue was a full week of good work. She gave them a full week within 4 days. The Dowager Duchess Augusta Ashworth was a narrow, imperious woman propped on a mountain of pillows in a room kept too warm by half, attended by a physician from the county town who bled her twice weekly and prescribed a tonic that had done nothing, by his own admission, but keep her comfortable while whatever ailed her ran its course. She received Hester with the flat, assessing stare of a woman who had outlived 3 physicians and did not intend to be impressed by a 4th, particularly not one who arrived with no letters of qualification beyond a dead father's reputation and a county's worth of gossip trailing behind her like smoke. "So, you are the girl from the garden," the dowager said. "I am the girl who tends the sick, your grace. The garden was an accident. I would rather discuss your cough." "Blunt," the dowager said, not entirely with disapproval, and coughed, a wet, tearing sound that went on longer than Hester liked. "Dr. Fell says it will pass with the season." "Dr. Fell has been saying that for 11 months, I am told." Hester crossed to the bedside table, where 3 brown bottles stood in a neat row, and lifted the nearest to the light without asking leave. She uncorked it, touched a drop to her tongue, and set it down again with a stillness that did not match what had gone very quiet behind her eyes. "May I ask who compounds your tonic, your grace?" "A cousin of yours, as it happens. Silas Vane took over the county's apothecary trade after your father died. Cheaper than sending to town, and family, or near enough, since your grandfather still holds some interest in the business." Hester said nothing for a moment. The tonic was sweet where it should have been bitter, thin where her father's recipe for a lung complaint would have been thick with syrup of horehound and coltsfoot. And underneath the sweetness sat a faint, wrong note she could not yet name, something bitter and mineral that had no business in a cough remedy at all. She filed the wrongness away, carefully, the way her father had taught her to file away any fact she could not yet use, and said only, "I would like to compound your next dose myself, your grace, from ingredients I trust. I can have it ready by evening, and if it does no better than Fell's, then you have lost nothing but an evening, and I will trouble you no further." The dowager studied her a long moment, the coughing fit having passed, her sharp eyes moving over Hester's plain grey dress, and her ink-stained fingers, and the small worn book she carried everywhere, tucked beneath one arm. "You have your father's directness, if the stories about him are true. He once told my late husband to his face that his gout was a wine problem, and not a doctoring one. He was not wrong, your grace." "No," the dowager said, and something that was nearly amusement crossed her face before she banished it. "He was not. Very well. Compound your evening dose, Miss Vane, and we shall see whether the daughter matches the father, or whether the county has simply been kind in its memory of a dead man." By evening, the new dose sat steaming gently in its glass, dark and bitter and correctly thick, and by the following morning the dowager's cough had eased enough that she slept past 9 for the first time in a fortnight, a fact that travelled below stairs faster than Hester could have carried it herself, and that silenced, at least for a time, the laundry maid's opinion of snared dukes and swapped sisters. It was on the 5th day that Silas Vane came to call. He came in his own gig, driving himself, dressed a shade too finely for a country apothecary, of modest means, with a smile that arrived at the front door a full second before he did. Hester had not seen her cousin in above a year, not since her father's funeral, where he had stood at the graveside in borrowed black and spoken movingly, everyone agreed, about family and duty and the debt he owed his late uncle's memory. He had taken up the family's small remaining trade interests soon after, and the guardianship of her bedridden grandfather's modest estate not long after that, on the grounds, reasonable enough at the time, that 2 orphaned girls and a dying old man had no head for business between them. "Cousin Hester," he said, taking both her hands before she could think to withhold either. "What a turn of fortune finds you here. The whole county is talking of nothing else." His eyes moved, quick and warm, over the hall behind her, the good rugs, the ancestral portraits, before returning to her face with a warmth that sat perhaps 1 degree too loud on it. "I confess I worried for you, alone in a great house, entangled in a business not entirely of your making. I have come to see for myself that you are well." "I am very well, Silas. I am glad of the work." Of course. "And her Grace's health, I understand you have been compounding her tonic yourself. In place of my own recipe." Something flickered behind his eyes, there and gone, quick as a fish beneath dark water. "I hope you found nothing amiss in it. I have kept faithfully to your father's own formulas, God rest him, out of respect for his memory." "I found it a touch too sweet for a lung complaint," Hester said, watching his hands rather than his face. The way her father had always told her to watch a man's hands when his mouth was busy being agreeable. "My father's recipe called for horehound in greater measure than I tasted there. Prices being what they are this year, I confess I have had to economize here and there on the finer ingredients," Silas said smoothly, and his hands, she noted, did not move at all, held very still and folded before him, which was itself a kind of tell in a man who talked as freely with his hands as with his mouth. "I did not think a duchess's household would notice a fraction less horehound in her cough syrup. I shall correct it, of course, now that I know a more discerning eye is watching over her." He left within the half-hour, warm to the last, pressing her hand again at the door and telling her how proud her father would be. And Hester stood in the cooling hall after his gig had rattled off down the avenue, and found she believed almost none of what he had said, though she could not yet have told a magistrate why. She went that same evening to the still-room, took down her father's little leather book, and turned to the page in his close slanted hand headed for a wasting cough, and read the recipe through twice by candlelight, measuring it against the taste still faint on her tongue, and found that whatever had gone into the dowager's bottle for 11 months, it had not been her father's recipe, economized or otherwise. It had been something else entirely, dressed up sweet enough that no one weak enough to need it would ever think to question it, and she closed the book slowly, and did not sleep well that night, though she could not yet have said precisely why. The Dowager Duchess mended steadily through the 3rd week of Hester's residence, colour returning to a face that had been the grey of old linen when Hester first saw it. And with the mending came, gradually, a household that remembered how to be a household. Windows opened that had been shuttered a year. A footman was heard, once, to whistle in the passage outside the breakfast-room, and was not immediately hushed for it. The Duke himself Hester saw daily, and said little to by unspoken arrangement on both sides, though she came to know him in the particular way one comes to know a person through their habits, rather than their speech. He closed the shutters himself each night, every window in the family wing, a task any footman could have performed, and that he performed anyway, methodically, without explanation. And it was Mrs. Pether, the housekeeper, who told her why, one evening as they sat together over the mending basket while the dowager slept. "His Grace's father died in this house, with the windows open, Mrs., Pether said, not looking up from her needle. A fever took him in a single night, quick as a candle going out, and his Grace was away at his studies, and did not reach home in time to close so much as a door for him. He has closed every window in this house himself every night since, rain or shine, and I have never once heard him say why. But I did not need telling twice, and the broken engagement, Hester said carefully, for she had heard that whispered too below stairs, in fragments never quite complete. I have heard it spoken of, though never plainly. Mrs. Pether's needle paused. Miss Eliza Wren. 3 years past now, a pretty thing, and clever with it, clever enough to let his Grace believe himself loved for 2 full years before a viscount with a larger fortune came courting, and she was gone within the month. No note but one to say she was sorry, though I never believed she was sorry for more than the timing. She resumed her stitching. He has not trusted his own judgment of a woman's heart since, Miss Vane, and I will say to you plainly, since no one else in this house has the courage to, that the whole staff has watched him these 3 weeks, and every one of us has seen something in him we had given up, hoping to see again. Make of that what you will. I only report what I have observed, same as I would report a fever or a fracture. Hester turned this over a long while that night, turned it over the way she turned over an unfamiliar recipe, testing it against what she already knew to be true, and found that it matched, piece for piece, a certain stillness she had noticed in him at supper. A way he had of watching her hands when she spoke rather than her face, as though hands, unlike faces, could not be schooled into a performance. Her own grief she disclosed to no one at Merrow Hall, until the humiliation forced it from her, on an evening some 10 days later, when the Dowager, sufficiently recovered to receive callers again, held a small supper that swelled, by the week's end, into something closer to a county assembly, with gentry from 3 parishes crowded into a dining-room too long shuttered to be properly warmed. Silas came, invited by the Dowager herself out of courtesy to Hester's family, and brought with him a particular brightness that evening, moving among the guests with the easy warmth of a man collecting favours he had not yet decided how to spend. It was over the fish course that a Mrs. Aldous, wife to a baronet 3 parishes distant, leaned across the table with the bright cruelty of a woman who has never once in her life gone hungry, and said, "Tell me, Miss Vane, is it true your father kept shop himself, behind his own counter? I understand apothecaries of the old sort still do, in the smaller towns." "He did, madam," Hester said. "He weighed every dose himself, to the grain, for 30 years, and buried fewer patients than any physician in this county buried in half that time." "How industrious, Mrs." Aldous said, with a small smile round the table that invited the other guests to share the joke, whatever it was. One so rarely meets a lady these days with ink-stained hands. It must have been a very great change coming here. It was, Hester agreed. I have gone from weighing medicine that saved lives to weighing conversation that saves nothing at all. I find I preferred the first. A silence followed, brief and startled, and then the Duke, from the head of the table, said, without lifting his eyes from his plate, "The physic in this county has improved considerably since Miss Vane's arrival, Mrs. Aldous. My mother's cough, which your own physician pronounced incurable this time last year, is gone entirely. I find myself disinclined to apologize for the ink on the hands that cured it, and something in the flatness of his delivery, the sheer economy of it, drew a startled bark of laughter from an old colonel 3 seats down, and the conversation moved on, and Mrs. Aldous did not trouble Hester again that evening. Later, alone in the still room with the party's noise still murmuring through the walls, Hester found the little book of her father's recipes open on the table where she had left it that afternoon, and beside it, tucked half beneath the blotter as though dropped in haste, a folded delivery note in a hand she recognised at once as Silas's own, listing an order of ingredients bound, by its heading, for Merrow Hall's still-room that same week. She had not meant to read another man's business. She read it anyway, the way she read any paper left carelessly in her sight, out of the same trained instinct that made her check a bottle before trusting its label, and found, among the ordinary items of syrup and sugar, a quantity of a cheap mineral salt no honest cough remedy had any use for at all. Billed, in the column beside it, at the price of a costly imported syrup her father had never once, in 30 years of practice, been able to afford in quantity. She folded the note small and put it inside the cover of her father's book, and did not yet know what it meant, only that it meant something, the way a single wrong stitch means something to a woman who has sewn 10,000 straight ones and can feel the flaw before her eye has found it. The truth came to her whole, 3 nights later, at a little past 11, with the dowager's tonic bottle in one hand and her father's book open on her knee to the page headed for a wasting cough, and Silas's delivery note spread flat beside it under the candle. She had been comparing, idly at first, and then with mounting attention, the ingredients her father had specified against the ingredients Silas's note recorded, and the mineral salt kept catching her eye, cheap and out of place, until she thought at last to test it the way her father had taught her to test any suspect compound. A pinch dissolved in water, held to the light, watched for the particular cloudy bloom that certain salts threw, and others did not. It bloomed. She sat very still afterward, the bottle in her hand, and did the arithmetic her father's training made automatic, the sums that told her a bottle billed for 12 shillings worth of true physic contained perhaps 2 shillings worth of anything the body could use. The rest cheap filler, and a salt that, taken faithfully for 11 months as the dowager had taken it, would have kept a sickness fed exactly as fast as it kept the patient comfortable enough never to complain. Not cruelty, she thought, turning the bottle in the candlelight. Not carelessness either. Arithmetic. Someone had done a sum, and the sum had come out in Silas Vane's favour. Every month the dowager remained gently, profitably unwell. And her grandfather's cough, worsening steadily these 3 months past under Silas's faithful attendance, sat in her mind beside the dowager's bottle like 2 figures in the same column, refusing to be added separately any longer. She did not sleep that night. She was still awake, book and note and bottle before her, when a commotion in the kitchen passage below, a dropped tray, a scullery girl's frightened cry, a smell of scorching that reached even the still-room, sent her running down before she had thought to set anything aside, and it was there, calming a hysterical kitchen maid with the same flat, competent hands she used on fevers, righting a spilled pan of coals before it could catch the rushes alight, that she heard, behind her, the Duke's voice say, quite without warning, "You put out fires the way other women scream at them," and turned to find him in the doorway in his shirt-sleeves, roused from his own late hours by the noise, watching her with an expression she had not yet seen on him. Someone had to, she said, brushing ash from her hands. "Mrs., Pether tells me the last 3 fires in this house required 2 footmen and a full quarter-hour to manage. You required 40 seconds and no footman at all." And then, unexpectedly, he laughed, not loudly, not long, but entirely, a sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it did the kitchen maid still sniffling by the hearth. and Mrs. Pether, arriving in the doorway behind him with a lamp, stopped dead at the sound of it, and Hester understood, without being told, that this was the first time in a very long while that anyone in that house had heard it. She said nothing about the tonic that night. She meant to tell him in the morning, when the household was rested and the words could be chosen properly, but the morning brought instead a letter from Larkspur Cottage, in her sister Cassandra's frightened hand, saying only that their grandfather had taken a turn for the worse, that Silas had been twice to see him already that week with new medicine of his own compounding, and that a Mr. Hollis, a lawyer from the county town, had been sent for to draw up papers Cassandra did not fully understand, but did not like the look of at all. Hester read it standing in the breakfast-room with her tea gone cold beside her, and felt the whole shape of the thing close over her at last, complete and merciless as a trap sprung, and understood that whatever quiet season the Duke had promised her, it had just run out 3 weeks early. She left for Larkspur Cottage within the hour, and it was raining again by the time her hired gig reached the turn at the church, a hard, sideways autumn rain that had not been forecast and would not let up for 2 full days, soaking through her cloak and chilling her to the bone long before she reached her grandfather's door, so that she arrived at Larkspur Cottage shivering and half blind with weather to find Silas Vane's own gig already standing in the yard, and a strange man in lawyer's black letting himself out of the front door with a leather case of papers under his arm. "You are too late for the signing, cousin," Silas said, appearing in the doorway behind the lawyer, with his warm smile fixed carefully in place, though something behind his eyes did not match it at all. "Your grandfather has put his affairs in good order at last, with my modest assistance. A wise man, providing for his family before the worst can come." "What have you had him sign?" Hester said, and did not trouble to keep the ice from her voice. "A simple matter of trusteeship, made formal at last. Nothing you need trouble your fine new household about." He glanced past her, at the rain, at her sodden cloak, with something that might almost have been pity if she had trusted him at all to feel it honestly. "You look unwell, Hester. I would not want it said the Duke of Merrow's household sent his intended out into weather like this, and did not think to send a proper carriage. But then, I understand there has been some question raised as to whether the understanding is entirely proper. Word does travel." He was gone before she could press him further, his gig rattling off into the rain, and it was 2 days later, once the fever her soaking had earned her had broken, and she could sit upright again in her grandfather's small parlour, that the second blow landed, delivered this time not by Silas himself, but by a broadsheet from the county town that Cassandra brought in trembling, and would not at first let her read. It named her. It named the garden, the ring, the mistaken proposal turned convenient scheme, and it printed, in full, a letter purporting to be in Hester's own hand, addressed to no one named, boasting that she had contrived the whole business from the start to trap a duke into marriage, and had used her position in his household to line her family's failing purse besides. The hand was close enough to her own to fool a stranger's eye. It was not her hand. She had never written a word of it. She sat with the broadsheet in her lap a long while, the fever's last heat still in her, and felt something in her go very cold and very clear, the particular stillness that came to her only when there was work to be done and no more time to spend on being wounded by it. "He has moved against grandfather's trust," she said finally, "and against my name, both in the same week, because he believes one of us cannot afford to fight both battles at once." She looked up at Cassandra, white and frightened by the window. "He is nearly right. We have 11 days until Michaelmas, when the trust accounts must be shown and grandfather's new arrangement made final beyond any undoing. I intend to prove, before that day, precisely what has gone into every bottle Silas Vane has sold this county for the past 3 years, and precisely where every shilling of grandfather's money has gone besides, and I will need every hour of the 11 days to do it. It took 4 of those 11 days merely to gather what she needed, and she did not gather it alone. Misters. Pether, sent by the Duke himself the moment word of the broadsheet reached Merrow Hall, arrived at Larkspur Cottage with a basket of provisions and a grim, unshakable loyalty that asked no questions, and offered instead 2 solid days of nursing and a promise, delivered flatly over the kitchen fire, that she had known Hester Vane a bare 6 weeks, and trusted her further than she trusted half the county she'd known 60 years. The Duke came himself on the 5th day, riding the 15 miles from Merrow Hall in weather scarcely better than the storm that had soaked her, and found Hester in the still-room with her father's book, Silas's delivery notes, and a growing stack of figures spread across the table before her. "You might have sent for me," he said, rather than facing a forged letter and a stolen trusteeship alone in a house with one elderly man and a frightened girl for company. "I did not know, Your Grace, whether a duke associated with a woman named in a public broadsheet as a fortune-hunting schemer was a duke who could afford to be seen coming to her aid," Hester said, not looking up from her sums. "I would not have blamed you for staying away." "Then you have understood remarkably little of what I have been trying to tell you these 6 weeks," he said, and something in his voice made her set down her pen at last. "I did not close the shutters on this house's grief for 3 years to open my eyes now, and find I have learned nothing from it. I do not care what a broadsheet prints. I care what is true, and I have watched you long enough now to know the difference between a woman who schemes and a woman who simply refuses to be moved. You are the second. You cannot know that for certain. Not yet. Not until this is finished." "No," he agreed, "but I find, again, that I do not wish to take it back regardless." He crossed to the table, looked down at the spread of figures without touching them. "Tell me what you need, and it is yours. Money, men, my own name lent wherever it will serve. I did not ask you to marry a title, Miss Vane. I asked you to marry a man, and a man does not send the woman he has asked to face a den of forgers alone." She might have answered him properly then, might have said aloud the thing that had been building quietly in her chest for 6 weeks, and had no name she trusted yet to give it, but a sharp rap at the still-room door interrupted them at the precise wrong moment, and Mrs. Pether's voice, urgent, said, "Miss Vane, you'd best come. There's a boy here from the Vane Trust offices, and he says he'll speak to no one but you, and he's crying fit to break his own heart." The boy was Jem Crewe, 16 years old, Silas Vane's underpaid clerk of 18 months, and he sat in Larkspur Cottage's kitchen with his hands shaking around a cup of tea he had not drunk a drop of, and told them, in halting pieces dragged out over the better part of an hour, that he had been made to copy figures into 2 separate ledgers for above a year now, one shown to the county's auditors and one kept locked in Silas's own desk, and that he had been paid extra, twice now, to practice a certain hand until it matched, near enough to fool most eyes, the hand of a dead apothecary named Edmund Vane. He said no harm would come of it, Jem said, miserable. He said old Mr. Vane's estate was his by right regardless, being family, and the papers were only making formal what was already true. But then the broadsheet came out with a letter in it I copied myself, word for word as he gave it to me, and I saw your name under it, miss, and I could not. I have not slept 2 nights together since. You will testify to this, Hester said, gently but without any softness in the words themselves. Before witnesses. It is the only thing that will save you as much as it saves me. He'll ruin me. He said he would, if ever I spoke of it. He has already ruined an old man's health and a young woman's name to keep himself comfortable, Jem. I do not think his threats are worth what you have been taught to fear they are worth. She looked at him steadily. But I will not lie to you. It will cost you something to speak the truth. It very often does. It has cost me a great deal these 11 days, and I intend to speak it regardless, at Michaelmas, before the magistrate and every soul in this county who reads a broadsheet, because the alternative is worse. Jem Crewe wept a while longer, and then, quietly, he agreed. They had 6 days left when Hester laid out. On the still-room table before the Duke, Mrs. Pether, and a Cassandra grown steadier by the hour, the whole shape of what she had found, the 2 ledgers, the true and the false, cross-checked line by line against Silas's own delivery notes, the mineral salt that bloomed cloudy in water and had no business in any bottle billed as costly syrup, the letter printed in the broadsheet, its hand close, but its content wrong in one detail no forger could have known to correct, because it lacked. Beneath the false seal pressed at its foot, the thin thread of blue-tinted wax her father had folded into every genuine seal he ever set, a private mark he had taught her alone to look for, years before, standing at his shop counter with a lit taper between them. Any bottle without the mark, don't trust it, she said aloud, half to herself, hearing her father's voice as clearly as if he stood beside her. Whatever the label promises. He taught me that before I was 12 years old, to guard against exactly this, a false hand wearing a true name. I did not think, when he taught me, that I would use it to catch his own nephew. The darkest of the 11 days came on the 9th, when word reached Larkspur Cottage that Josiah Vane had taken a turn in the night so severe that the county physician, sent for in haste, would say only that the old man's heart was tired, and that no one could yet promise which way the balance would fall by morning. Hester sat with her grandfather until past 3, his hand thin and dry in hers, and asked him nothing, because there was nothing left to ask that mattered more than simply being there. And it was only as the candle guttered low that she allowed herself, at last, the one question she had been refusing to sit with all these 11 days, whether the truth, even proven, even public, would arrive in time to matter to any of the people she loved. Michaelmas fell on a bright, hard-edged morning, the kind of clear autumn day that made the county town's square look scrubbed clean for the occasion, and it was there, before the sitting magistrate and the assembled quarter-day crowd of tenants, tradesmen and gentry, come to see their accounts settled and their gossip confirmed, that Silas Vane arrived to make final, before witnesses. The trusteeship papers his lawyer had drawn, and found instead the whole of Merrowhall's household, the Dowager Duchess included, seated in the front row of the assembly room, with the particular stillness of people who have come to watch something end. He recovered his smile quickly. He was a man well practised in recovering it. "Cousin Hester," he said, inclining his head as she rose from her seat, "I had not looked to see you well enough to attend, after your recent fever, and in such company." His eyes swept the row behind her, the Duke, the Dowager, and lingered a moment too long on the second ledger she carried, bound in plain brown paper, before his smile widened further still. "I trust you have not come to make a scene of a family matter, before all these good people." "I have come to make a matter of the truth, cousin," Hester said, "which I understand troubles you more than any scene could." She turned to the magistrate, an elderly, deliberate man named Justice Harwell, who had known both Vane brothers, father and uncle, for 40 years, and set the ledger on the table before him. "I ask leave to show the court 2 accounts of the same trust, kept by the same hand, showing 2 entirely different sums. What followed took the better part of 2 hours, and no one in that crowded room, by the end of it, thought the time had been wasted." Line by line, Hester laid the false ledger beside the true one Jem Crewe had helped her recover from beneath a false bottom in Silas's own desk drawer, showing where sums paid for costly syrups had in fact bought cheap mineral salts, where rents collected from her grandfather's small remaining lands had been recorded twice, once received, and once, months later, mysteriously lost. Where a trusteeship meant to protect an old man's failing years had instead been quietly, patiently emptying them. Silas fought every inch of it with the same warm, reasonable voice he had used at every doorstep of his life, insisting on honest economy, on a nephew's devotion, on the ordinary confusions of a busy man's accounts, until Hester turned at last to the broadsheet's forged letter, laid it flat upon the table, and asked the room's assembled apothecary guildmaster, sent for that morning at her request, to examine the seal. "There is no thread of blue wax beneath it," the guildmaster said, holding it to the light for all to see. "Every letter I ever received from Edmund Vane in 30 years of trade carried that mark. It is entirely absent here." "A trifling omission," Silas said, though his voice had lost, for the first time that morning, a fraction of its warmth. "My uncle was not always so careful in his later years." "Your uncle," Hester said, "taught me to seal a letter before he taught me to read one." "He was never once careless in 30 years, cousin. You did not know to forge what you never troubled to learn." She turned then to Jem Crewe, waiting pale and trembling at the room's edge, and said only, "Tell them what you told me." He told them. It took him a bare 5 minutes, halting at first and then, as no thunder fell upon him for speaking, steadier, and by the time he finished the room had gone very quiet, the particular quiet of a crowd realizing, all at once, which way its sympathy had been misplaced. It was the Dowager Duchess Augusta who broke the silence, rising from her seat unaided for the first time in above a year, her voice carrying to every corner of the room without need of raising it. "I was told, some weeks ago, that Miss Vane had schemed her way into my household to catch herself a duke," she said. "I confess I believed a good part of it myself, at first. I have since watched this same woman nurse me back from a sickness 11 months of proper physicians could not touch. And I am now given to understand, from her own careful accounting, that the sickness was fed rather than fought by the very man who claimed to be curing it." She looked directly at Silas Vane, and there was nothing warm left in her voice at all. "Frightened men build alibis, sir. Guilty men build them more carefully than anyone. I have lived 71 years, and I have never yet seen a set of accounts as carefully guilty as yours." The room turned then, the way a crowd's mood turns, all at once and irreversibly, murmurs rising to a low roar of outrage that Justice Harwell was a full minute restoring to order, and it was in that turning tide that Silas Vane's composure finally, visibly cracked, the warmth dropping from his face all at once to show, beneath it, something Hester had not expected to see, and found she could not entirely despise even now: a thin, frightened man who had spent a lifetime the poor cousin at every table, watching wealth and title pass him by for want of an accident of birth, who had decided somewhere along the way that a clever hand with a ledger was owed what a careless world had never troubled to give him honestly. "I gave that family everything," he said, to no one in particular, his voice for once entirely without performance. "Every year of my life managing accounts too small to matter to anyone but me, while a duke need only be born to have what I earned with my own hand and was never once thanked for. I did not think it theft. I thought it, at the very worst, a debt finally collected." "It was theft, cousin," Hester said, not unkindly, "and an old man's health besides, which no ledger can ever repay." She looked to the magistrate. "I ask no violence done him, your worship. I ask only that the trust be restored, the accounts made whole so far as they may be, and that he answer to the law for what the law names fraud, whatever he chooses to call it in his own heart." Justice Harwell stripped Silas Vane of his trusteeship within the hour, remanded him to the county assizes to answer for forgery and theft both, and it was done, in the end, without a single blow struck or a single life ended, exactly as Hester had asked, and Jem Crewe, whose confession had broken the case open, was given a magistrate's mercy and a clerk's post in an honest office 3 parishes distant, where no one need ever hold his 16th year against him. Word reached Larkspur Cottage that same evening that Josiah Vane, informed at his bedside of the trust's restoration and his granddaughter's public vindication both, had opened his eyes for the first time in 2 days and asked, in a voice thin but entirely his own, whether there was any of Hester's proper cough syrup left in the house, because Silas's had never once agreed with him. The Duke of Merrow came to Larkspur Cottage himself 3 days after Michaelmas, on a morning bright enough that the whole county seemed washed clean of the storm that had preceded it, and found Hester in the garden, where the feverfew still grew wild against the wall, and did not wait for any formality before he spoke. "I have brought a ring bought for the purpose this time," he said, and there was for once no stillness left in his voice at all, only a plainness she had come to trust above any flowery speech the county could have offered instead. "I asked you once in the dark, believing you were someone else, and I have spent every week since learning precisely who you are, and I find the asking suits you far better than it ever suited the mistake. Will you have me, Hester Vane, apothecary's daughter, and no one else's name attached to the offer this time?" "You have not yet told me what you are asking for," she said, though her eyes were bright. "Everything," he said simply. "Merrow Hall, my name, whatever standing it carries, and a plain fact that I do not sleep easily in a house you are not somewhere inside of. But I am asking for something else besides, and I would have you hear it before you answer the first part. I intend to found, on the grounds of Merrow Hall, a proper dispensary, open to any soul in this county too poor to pay a town physician's fee, and I intend it to be named for Edmund Vane, and directed, for as long as she'll have the post, by his daughter. That offer stands whether you marry me or not. I did not want you ever to wonder in the years after whether you had traded your father's trade for my title. I want them standing side by side, his name over the door and yours running the accounts, precisely as your training earned." Hester stood a long moment in the garden, with the feverfew nodding white around her feet, and thought of a still room that smelled of lavender and wax, of a small leather book worn soft at the corners, of a mark folded into wax that had in the end unmade a lying man's whole careful scheme, and found that the answer, when it came, needed no rehearsal at all. "Stay because you wish it," he added, quieter, before she could speak. not gratitude, not rescue repaid. I will not have it said, in this county or any other, that I married a woman who owed me anything. I owe you my mother's health and my own good name both, twice over. Marry me only because you wish to, and for no debt either of us imagines we carry. I wish it, Hester said, and it cost her nothing at all to say it plainly. I have wished it, I think, since a man in a rained-out garden asked me a question and waited, actually waited, to hear my answer, instead of assuming he already knew it. He took her hand then, not with a ring pressed hastily into it in the dark, but slowly, in daylight, before witnesses enough, missus. Heather at the cottage window, Cassandra on the step, a grandfather propped up against his pillows watching through the open casement with tears he did not trouble to hide, and the county, which had spent a full season deciding what to make of a mistaken proposal in a dark garden, found itself obliged, within the fortnight, to decide instead what to make of a wedding openly and properly announced, and found, on the whole, that it preferred the second story a great deal better. Cassandra Vane was married the following spring to Mr. Sir. Tom Ashby, the parish schoolmaster she had loved in silence through every week her aunt spent arranging a grander match for her, and it was Hester, home from her own honeymoon journey, who stood beside her sister at the small country church, and thought that no dark garden and no mistaken ring could have arranged a happier ending for a woman who had wanted, all along, only to be asked plainly, and to answer honestly, the very thing Hester had wanted for herself. Aunt Prudence Colby, chastened by a season's gossip she had done more than her share to feed, made her peace with both nieces slowly, in the particular halting way of a proud woman learning humility late in life, and was heard, more than once in the years that followed, to tell any listening stranger that she had known from the very first that Hester Vane was destined for great things, a claim no one in the family troubled to contradict for kindness' sake. Silas Vane served 4 years at hard labour for his forgeries, and was heard from only once more, in a brief letter to Josiah Vane some years later, asking forgiveness in terms so plain and so unpolished that the old man, who had never been an unkind soul at heart, sent back a short reply granting it, though he never again permitted his nephew near a ledger of his own. Merrow Hall's dispensary opened its doors the following autumn, a plain stone building at the edge of the park with Edmund Vane, apothecary carved deep over its lintel, and Hester Vane, now Hester Ashworth, Duchess of Merrow, spent 3 mornings of every week behind its counter still, weighing doses to the exact scruple, precisely as her father had taught her, turning away no farmer's wife too poor to pay, exactly as he had never once turned one away himself. The Dowager Duchess Augusta lived a further 11 years in vigorous health, long enough to see 2 grandchildren born, and to tell each of them, at every opportunity, the story of the daughter-in-law who had cured her with a bottle, correctly compounded and unmasked a fraud with a thread of blue wax, embellishing it a little more fondly with every telling, until the children could scarcely tell where the true account ended and their grandmother's affection for it began. Merrow Hall itself, in the years that followed, was rarely dark before midnight, and never shuttered before its lamps were lit, its windows standing open on warm evenings long after the habit of guarding against grief had quietly, gently, come undone. The Duke closed the shutters himself, still, some nights from old habit rather than old fear. But he no longer did it alone, and more often than not the task went forgotten entirely, curtains left open to the stars, while the house behind them stayed warm and full of voices long into the night. On the first fine evening of the following autumn, a full year turned since the storm-blown lamps had first put out their light along that same garden wall, Hester walked out again past the yew hedge where the feverfew still grew, this time with lanterns lit at every step and her husband's hand steady in hers, and stood a moment where a stranger's ring had once closed cold and unexpected around her fingers in the dark. "I have never asked," he said, watching her face in the lamplight, "whether you would have said yes that first night, in the garden, in the dark, if I had somehow known from the start which sister stood before me." "You will never know," Hester said, and there was warmth enough in it that he did not press her further, because you did not ask the right question in the dark. You asked it again, properly, in the light, and waited to hear my answer. That is the only proposal that ever mattered, and the only one I ever meant to accept. A house is not made light by chance, nor a name made honest by birth alone. Both are earned the same patient way a bottle is properly measured, and a ledger is honestly kept, one careful weighing at a time, until at last the truth, like good medicine faithfully compounded, cannot help but show itself plainly to anyone who troubles to look.